didn't get the answer. You just don't understand the answer that you got. It's not that there wasn't an answer. Not that God didn't hear you. He did hear you. And he gave you an answer. The problem is you don't understand the answer that you got. And a lot of times you don't want to take the time to understand the answer that you got. Watch this. He says to him, he says, you go and save. He says, go in your strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Watch this. Here's the thing. What he says is, go save him go save Israel out of Midian's hand. In other words, what he tells him, he says, listen, go and fight against the enemy. 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 Am I not sending you? That is, something good is going to come from it because I'm sending you. Am I not sending you? He says, go and fight against the enemy. He says, something good is going to come from this. Go and fight. Go in your strength and save Israel from the hand of Midian. That is, go and fight against the enemy. Why? Watch this. Because, brothers and sisters, understand, there are some things you are not going to get an answer to unless you fight. There are some breakthroughs you're not going to get unless you fight. You have got to fight. There is no backing up. There is no backing down. There is no backing away. You have got to fight. Fight the good fight of faith. Watch this. He's got a question. God's got an answer. But the answer is not coming easily. Good God from Zion. The answer is not coming easy. Because, watch this, sometimes you got to fight for the answer. You got to fight for clarity. You got to fight for understanding. You got to fight for insight. You got to fight to be able to see, and you got to fight to get the direction that you got to move in. And the problem with a whole lot of folk is you want everything handed to you on a silver platter. You want everything just to come nice, sweet, and easy. But the reality is the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Watch this. See, there are a lot of us who are waiting for answers, and we are waiting for insight, and we're looking for understanding, and you have not got it because you haven't been fighting. And you think it is just going to be handed to you. You think it's just going to be given to you. I'm waiting for my breakthrough. I'm looking for my breakthrough. I'm waiting for an answer from the Lord. You keep on waiting. You better start fighting, because the reality is you can wait all you want to, but until you start fighting, there are some things that are not going to be released into your life. There are some things that are not going to be released into your understanding. There's a vision that you will not be able to see. There's some clarity that you will not have until you start fighting. Watch this. He says, go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. He tells him, he says, listen, Gideon, you got to go and fight against what's fighting against you. Go and fight against what is fighting against you. Go and fight against what is fighting against you. You're going to have to put up your spiritual dukes, and you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to fight. Now, remember, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God, through the pulling down of what? Strongholds. Watch this. But the reality is, you are going to have to fight, watch this, to get it. Remember, Jesus said it like this. He says, if you acknowledge me before men, I will acknowledge you before my Father who's in heaven. But he says, watch this. If you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father, what? Who is in heaven. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty through God, through the pulling down of strongholds. Watch this. The way that we fight, in this fight, you don't use a knife. You don't use a gun. You don't use brass knuckles. You don't use a bat. You don't use lawyers. No. In this fight, it is spiritual. And the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Praise is my weapon. Worship is my weapon. Magnifying him is my weapon. Praying is my weapon. Fasting is my weapon. Living is my weapon. Giving is my weapon. Jesus said, if you acknowledge me before men, I will acknowledge you before my Father who is what? In heaven. Watch here. And he says, but now if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father what? Who is in heaven. In other words, Jesus says, if you act like you know me, I will act like I know you. Y'all don't hear me talking. He says, if you act like you know me in front of people, I will act like I know you in front of my Father. I'm going to work in here. In other words, watch this. When it's time for you to acknowledge that God has been good to you, when it's time for you to acknowledge that you know who he is and you know what he's done, when it's time for you to acknowledge that you know that Jesus is Lord, that you know that mountain that you climbed, that river that you crossed, that battle that you won, if it had not been for the Lord who was on your side. Oh, good God from Zion. When it's time for you to acknowledge him, when it's time for you to acknowledge him, do you or will you acknowledge him? Watch this. He says, based upon that, watch this. Here comes the fight. He says, based upon that, he says, it will determine whether or not I will acknowledge you before my Father who is in heaven. Watch this, because there's coming a point in time, baby, when you're going to need a prayer answered. There's coming a point in time when you're going to need a door made swung open for you. There's coming a point in time when you're going to need a window lifted up for you. There's coming a point in time when you're going to need favor. There's coming a point in time when you're going to need something done with your children. There's coming a point in time when you're going to need some understanding, when you're going to need some insight. And all Jesus is saying, look at here. If you act like you know me, he says, I will act like I know you. In other words, when everybody else is praising him, when everybody else is magnifying him, he says, if you act like you know me with everybody else, he says, I'm going to act like I know you when you need me with, oh God, y'all don't hear me talking in here. It is the reason why some people can't get a breakthrough. It is the reason why some people can't get some stuff answered. It is the reason why God is not releasing certain things in people's lives. Because when it's time for you to act like you know him, when it's time for you to act like he's God, when it's time for you to act like he is your supplier, he is your sustainer, he is your keeper, he is your all in all, your everything, you act like a bump on the log. You act like you don't know who the preacher is talking about. You act like you don't know who the choir is singing about. You act like you don't know who the evangelist is talking about.